Grace and peace and spoiler alert for the movie First Reformed. My name's Ryan, I'm the movie pastor. What that means is that I use my movie pass and watch a bunch of movies, most of which ostensibly seem to have nothing to do with God or faith or ministry, and I find God within them. This time I watched a movie about Ethan Hawke playing a reverend who wears a collar like this and works for a church like this one and deals with problems largely like I deal with. It'd be hard to find a more direct application to my life, and yet, as is often the case in interpretation of texts, sometimes that only makes it harder. Sometimes the passages of the Bible which are most wild and woolly and most symbolic are non-threatening and can make sense to us by way of metaphor, and the passages with people most like ourselves are a little scary. Well, First Reformed is certainly a thriller, and I've got to start by kind of giving it the tip of my hat for its depiction of a clergy person honestly struggling in their faith. I think it does a really good job. Ethan Hawke's character, Toller, is trying to make sense of his world and his environment, and he starts a journal, which is a spiritual discipline, and he seeks to be as honest and as humble as possible, and he reflects to himself in that journal that prayer doesn't feel rich anymore, that it's hard to do, and that when he does pray, it feels like nobody picks up on the other end of the line. That's really real and true to the experience of many of the ministers that I know. There's a line in the movie where he says, I think he's quoting Thomas Merton, he says, "How easily they speak of prayer, they who have never prayed." But so many of the people who have authentic and deep faith struggle with this kind of thing. C.S. Lewis writes about it in his book, A Grief Observed. You hear about Mother Teresa. She'll write about the darkness that she carried with her most of her life that seemed to be connected to a depression, but also a sense of missing God, feeling far away from God. And of course, with me talking about it, I felt this. I've experienced times in my life when I felt like God was out of reach. Times in my ministry. I'm not in one of those times now, but I have been and will be again. And I think it's important to recognize, for the understanding of First Reformed, as well as the understanding of clergy in your world, that when a pastor or a minister confesses this in a place where it's appropriate to confess it, I think saying so from the pulpit or something would probably be irresponsible. But if in confidence or if in a safe environment, that said, you have to know this isn't a person with an insincere faith. This isn't a sign of hypocrisy or a sign of someone who is about to abandon Christianity. This is someone struggling. It's exactly what it looks like, and it's a real part of the season of many people getting more mature. In fact, I think on this shelf over here, I have Stages of Faith Development. Here it is. Fowler talks about this. I mean, this is textbook stuff. This is a textbook. And so it's cool. It's neat to see that depicted by Hollywood somewhere. But, of course, First Reformed doesn't stop there. That's actually kind of a starting point. That's this character. Meet Toller. Now we're going to tell a story about him. And the story that we hear about Toller as he's going through the stages of faith development and at a dry stage is him encountering a environmental activist. So Toller's taken in by depression. This environmental activist is taken in by depression, but about different things. For Toller, it's a inability to connect and to feel that God is real emotionally. And for the activist, it's a over ability to connect and a sense of despair about the state of the world. And Toller reacts like you would expect a pastor in this situation to react. He says it was invigorating. You know, there's a massive difference between not knowing the truth and knowing the truth but not feeling it. Knowing that it is true even though you can't see it at the moment. And sometimes living out your faith, engaging it, is what makes it feel real. So Toller has this theological debate, and boy, it's like being a kid again. Isn't it great to have theological debates about the need for hope? Yeah, yay, go, Advent, and symbolism, and theology, and all that stuff. Well, the environmental activist kills himself. And so here we enter into a spiral of Toller dealing with some of the guilt that he might have been responsible, that his counsel might have been toxic, his need to care for the widow who is pregnant, whose life he had previously pleaded for, and his interest and his sincere understanding and belief that what this environmental activist was fighting for was just, that it was a theologically true understanding that, hey, we ought to care for creation. That's another tip of my hat for First Reformed. I really appreciate that it acknowledges that the vast majority of Christians, particularly Christian clergy, and particularly in the Reformed and mainline denominations, understand that the world God created is a world we ought to honor and care for and protect. That's not, they did not show any Christians being like, oh yeah, but because of my Christianity, I don't care about the environment. Because that's not true. That's not how Christianity works. And if you have a sincere faith in Jesus and in the Bible, and you're looking to the Bible to direct your beliefs about creation, you're going to be pro-creation. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people who have other beliefs in addition to their Christianity. That's a thing that happens, and that's even legitimate. But I like the way they show that with Cedric the Entertainer's Reverend Jeffers, who isn't defending not caring about the environment on theological grounds, but just kind of on practical grounds, right? I've got this big church, I've got donors, some of those donors have interests that pollute, and their polluting interests benefit me, and I've just got a lot to worry about. It's hard running a church this big, so why don't you shut up and stop making my job so hard? That's honest. That's a more sincere reflection of what our faith looks like in public life with regard to the environment. So Toller is taken in by this reality, like, man, what if churches did something about stuff that matters? What if churches lived up to their birthright and started engaging the issues of the day? Once again, this is textbook stuff. This is classic development of spiritual maturity. And near the final act of the film, he says, I've found a new way of praying, or I found a new kind of prayer. The implication is, I'm going to pray with my feet now. That's a quote from Abraham Joshua Heschel. It's a quote from Abraham Joshua Heschel when he was walking with Martin Luther King. I'm going to pray with my feet. So here, Toller decides he's going to start speaking about caring for the environment and using words from the environmental activist and standing up to some of the people around him who have more money and more power with regard to the local community, and speaking the truth that he understands as truth from God about the importance of being good to our world and paying attention to the way that not being good to our world impacts people. That's a really important theological understanding that I actually wish this movie spent a little more time on, is that it's not just rocks and trees that we're worried about, but that when we desecrate rocks and trees, it hurts the poor, and it hurts human beings. Another thing I'm annoyed about is that while it's talking about all that stuff, it quotes a verse from Revelations, which isn't a verse in the Bible. Revelation is singular. There's only one revelation of Jesus Christ. But anyway, let's move on to the climax of the film, or the conclusion of the film. And that's where Tuller decides that he is going to strap on a bomb at this rededication ceremony, this anniversary of his small little church, where Jeffers is going to be, and a key politician who's a gross polluter, and he's going to make a massive statement for the environment. He's going to be a martyr by killing all of these people and showcasing environmental justice, just like the activist wanted to do before he killed himself. And at that moment, after he's strapped on the vest and he's ready to go and do that, he sees the widow Mary walking into his church to support him because she cares about him and likes him. And he's overcome with the horror of what he's about to do, that this isn't just a symbolic gesture, but these are human beings, and he was going to harm them. And he switches instead to a different symbolic gesture. All through the movie has been a ratcheting up to more and more responsiveness, doing more rather than doing less, having a active faith rather than a passive one that impacts the world rather than one that doesn't. And he's about to impact the world tremendously, and he realizes that is a terrible idea. I make bad choices about how to impact the world. And so he instead chooses to drink a glass of drain cleaner, which the movie doesn't show. Instead, shows him putting down the glass and greeting Mary by his door, and the two beginning a very long and passionate kiss, which is not realistic, which implies that he did drink the drain cleaner and died, and then proceeded into a world of his imagination. Wish fulfillment. One would say that within the scope of the movie, within the universe of the movie, he received his eternal reward. He will now live his life in the bliss that he wanted, that he wouldn't really allow himself to admit he believed. So what an interesting statement. Here's a person who has a faith, and he doesn't have a comic book faith or a stereotype of faith. He has the kind of faith that actually real mature Christians live out in the real world. And he seeks to make it more active, and the more active he makes it, the more real his faith feels, but then has a failure of nerve and a failure of execution, really doing the wrong thing, preparing to hurt people, at which point he succumbs. He ends up having very little influence or impact, and then he goes to heaven anyway. That seems pretty good in my book. in terms of theology.
And when